I was holding 36 donor packets, sweating through my collar, and trying not to drop a folder in front of people who bought lake houses the way I bought lunch. That was my job at Jansen Retreats. I was 23, junior operations assistant, which meant I was useful when someone needed a box moved, a name corrected, a shuttle time changed, or a printer fixed 5 minutes before rich people started asking questions. I wasn't important enough to be nervous, but I was nervous anyway. The event was at George Jansen's new lakefront property outside Nashville. It wasn't fully open yet, so everything still smelled like fresh paint, cedar, and money. The main lodge had huge windows facing the water, a stone fireplace nobody needed in June, and staff moving around, like we were all afraid of breathing too loudly. I had been there since 7 that morning. Guest packets, transportation notes, seating changes, welcome cards, vendor badges. Somebody from catering lost the updated list for shellfish allergies, and somehow that became my problem, even though I had never met the caterer before that day. By 6, the investors started arriving in linen jackets, summer dresses, watches that looked heavier than my rent, and voices that carried because nobody ever told them to lower them. Then George Jansen walked in. You could feel the room adjust around him. He didn't have to raise his voice or wave his hands. He just smiled, touched a few shoulders, remembered names, and people leaned toward him like he was giving out futures. He was polished in a way I had only seen in men who never had to explain themselves. Calm gray suit, no tie, perfect hair, and that relaxed smile that made everybody else work harder. I was standing near the host table with a clipboard when he passed me. "Mason," he said, like he hadn't needed to check my name badge. "Yes, sir. Stay useful tonight." "That's the plan." He gave me one quick nod and moved on. That was George's version of praise, I guessed, or at least I told myself it was. I saw Sabrina about 15 minutes later. Everybody saw her. She came down the staircase from the private mezzanine with Talia beside her, both of them laughing at something nobody else had heard. Sabrina was blonde, bright, and impossible to ignore. Not quiet rich, not the kind of woman who tried to look above attention. She enjoyed it. You could tell by the way she paused at the bottom step just long enough for people to look, then acted like she hadn't noticed. She wore a pale blue dress, simple from far away, expensive up close. Her hair fell over one shoulder, and she had a glass in her hand she barely touched. Talia was darker-haired, sharp-eyed, smiling like she already knew the ending of every conversation before it started. I looked too long. Sabrina's eyes landed right on me. I looked down at my clipboard like there was something urgent on it besides shuttle times and room numbers. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. About an hour later, Amy from events sent me to bring updated donor materials to the host table near the East Terrace. I walked over with a neat stack of cream folders, trying to look like I belonged near the people standing there. Sabrina was at the table with Talia. Of course she was. I set the folders down. Updated packets for tomorrow's preview tour. Sabrina turned her head slowly, like she had been waiting for me. "You're Mason," she said. I stood a little straighter. "Yes, ma'am." Talia made a small sound into her glass. Sabrina smiled. "Ma'am, that's painful." "Sorry. Don't apologize that fast. It makes people want to see what else they can make you do." I didn't know what to say to that, so I looked at the folders. These have the revised cabin assignments and breakfast cards. Very official. She reached out and touched the sleeve of my jacket near my wrist. Just 2 fingers, like she was checking fabric. "You've been running around all day, haven't you?" "A little." "A little?" Talia said. "He looks like someone told him one wrong staple could end the company." I laughed because they were laughing, but mine came out too quick. Sabrina tilted her head. "You don't know how to take a compliment, do you?" I wasn't sure that was one. Oh, it was. Her fingers left my sleeve. Mostly. That was when George appeared beside the table. No warning. No sound. Just there. My stomach tightened for no reason, except maybe there was a reason, and I already knew it. "Sabrina," he said, then nodded to Talia. "Everything good?" "Beautiful," Sabrina said. "Your staff is terrified, but the place is beautiful." George looked at me. "Mason's fine. He knows how to stay useful." There it was again. "Yes, sir," I said. Sabrina's eyes stayed on me. "He's doing better than fine." George smiled a little, like he thought she was teasing the help, and it didn't matter. "Good. Keep it that way." Then he was gone, already being pulled toward a man from Atlanta with a loud laugh and a red face. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt Sabrina watching me. I picked up the empty packet box. "I should get back." "You should," she said, "before someone notices you standing still." Talia laughed softly. I walked away with my face hot and my grip too tight on the box. The night kept moving. The sun dropped behind the lake. Lights came on along the dock. People drank, smiled, made quiet deals, and acted like the resort was already a success, because George Jansen had decided it would be. I fixed 2 seating errors, found a missing welcome gift, and talked a shuttle driver out of leaving before the last group was ready. Around 10, I went through the service hallway behind the dining room to grab revised brunch cards from the staff office. The hallway was narrow, with beige walls, stacked banquet chairs, and the low sound of music coming through from the main room. When I turned the corner, Sabrina was there. Talia leaned against the wall behind her, arms crossed, entertained. I stopped so fast the folder under my arm slipped halfway out. Sabrina looked at it. "Careful." I pushed it back into place. "Sorry, I didn't know anyone was back here." "I know." She stepped closer. "That's why I came back here." I looked past her, then back. "Do you need something?" "Maybe." She glanced at Talia, then at me again. "You look like you know being near me is a bad idea." My mouth went dry. The smart answer was no. The professional answer was no. The answer that kept my job clean and my life simple was, "I'm just here to work." Instead, I said, "Maybe it is." Talia's eyebrows lifted like I had finally said something worth hearing. Sabrina smiled, but it wasn't sweet. It was pleased, like I had stepped where she wanted me to step. "That depends," she said. "On what?" She moved just close enough that I could smell her perfume, something expensive and warm, not too strong, but impossible to miss. "How well you follow instructions." For a second, I heard the clink of glasses from the dining room, the muffled laugh of some investor, the hum of the air conditioning overhead. I remember all of it because I needed something normal to hold on to. Sabrina waited. I nodded once, like an idiot. She smiled wider. "Good night, Mason." Then she walked past me, close enough that her shoulder brushed my arm. Talia followed, and as she passed, she gave me a look that said she knew exactly what had just happened, even if I didn't. I stood in that hallway for another few seconds before I remembered why I had gone there. By the time I drove back to my apartment in Nashville, my head was full of her voice, her hand on my sleeve, George saying my name, Talia watching like it was all a game. I told myself it was nothing. Rich people got bored. Powerful people teased staff. Women like Sabrina Jansen probably made men nervous for fun and forgot them before breakfast. I told myself that all the way home. But I didn't believe it. 3 days later, George Jansen's assistant called my desk and told me Mr. Jansen wanted to see me upstairs. That was the kind of sentence that made your stomach drop, even when you hadn't done anything wrong. I was in the operations bullpen, sorting vendor invoices for a breakfast meeting I wasn't invited to. My desk was beside the copy room, which told you everything about my level in the company. People walked by me all day holding coffee, talking over me, asking me where things were, and forgetting I had answered before they even turned the corner. So when George wanted me in his office, half the room noticed. Amy looked up from her laptop. "What did you do?" "Nothing," I said. "That's what people say before security walks them out." "Helpful." She smirked, but I could feel her watching me as I stood and fixed my shirt cuffs. I checked my reflection in the dark office window on the way to the elevator. I looked like exactly what I was. 23, trying too hard, wearing a blazer from a sale rack, and shoes I had polished that morning, because I thought adults noticed that stuff. George's office was on the top floor, facing downtown Nashville. Not flashy, not cluttered. Just clean lines, leather chairs, framed property photos, and a view that made you understand why people wanted to sit close to him. He was standing behind his desk, reading something on a tablet. "Mason," he said without looking up. "Come in." I stepped inside. "Yes, sir." He tapped the screen once, then set the tablet down. "Sabrina is heading the foundation showcase tied to the lakefront launch." I nodded like I knew more than I did. "Yes, sir." "She needs operational help. Vendor prep, donor gifts, staging notes, guest lists, floral timing, lighting, room setup, hospitality flow, the usual small fires." My pulse started acting strange. "She asked for you specifically," George said. I kept my face still. At least I tried to. "Me?" "That's what I said." "Of course, I can help." George studied me for a second, and I hated how much that 1 second made me feel measured. "You did well over the weekend," he said. "You stayed calm." "Thank you." Don't get impressed by the wrong things. These events look glamorous, but they work because somebody remembers where the extension cords are. "Yes, sir." His mouth moved almost like a smile. "Sabrina likes things done her way. Listen carefully. Keep records. Don't make me hear about problems after they've already become visible." "I understand." "Good. She's at the lake property this afternoon. Take the revised donor list and staging binder with you." That was it. No warning. No raised eyebrow. No sign he had any idea that his wife had cornered me in a service hallway and said things I had replayed more times than I wanted to admit. I left his office with the assignment in my hand, and for about 5 minutes I told myself this made everything legitimate. George approved it. George assigned me. This was work. By 2:30, I was driving toward the lake with the staging binder on the passenger seat and my phone sitting face up in the cup holder like it might do something by itself. The property looked different in daylight without investors around. Quieter, more unfinished. Golf carts parked near the lodge, workers carrying trim boards into cabins, landscapers dragging hoses across fresh sod. Sabrina was waiting in one of the unfinished villas used for donor previews. It sat above the water with wide glass doors, pale wood floors, a kitchen nobody had cooked in, and furniture placed just carefully enough to look effortless. There were fabric samples on the counter, floral mock-ups near the dining table, and 3 open boxes of branded gift bags. Sabrina turned when I came in. "There he is," she said, "my favorite employee." I almost dropped the binder. "I'm pretty sure I haven't earned that." "No, but you blush like you have." I glanced toward the open doorway behind me. "Mrs. Jansen?" "Sabrina," she said. I hesitated. She smiled. "That was an instruction, Mason." So I said it. "Sabrina." The room felt too quiet after that. She walked me through the layout like this was a normal assignment. Gift table near the entry. Donor plaques on easels. Wine tasting station near the lake doors. Foundation boards along the interior wall. She asked where I thought the guest flow would jam, and when I answered, she actually listened. "That corner," I said, pointing with my pen. "If people stop there to read the board, servers won't be able to pass behind them." Sabrina looked at the space, then at me. "You're right." That did something to me, which was embarrassing. It was just 2 words, but I wasn't used to being right in rooms like that. She moved closer and took the pen out of my hand. "So we shift it here?" "Yeah, that gives them more room." She marked the binder, then handed the pen back. Our fingers touched for less than a second. I hated that I noticed. For the next week, the showcase became my whole job. At least that was the official version. I drove back and forth between Nashville and the lake property. I checked vendor arrival windows, counted donor bags, called the florist twice a day, adjusted place cards, confirmed lighting rentals, and made sure every guest name matched across 3 different lists because rich people noticed when their names were slightly wrong. Sabrina made every task feel private. She would call me into an empty model cabin to ask about lamp placement. She would stand beside me at a sample table, close enough that her shoulder nearly touched mine, and ask which linen looked less boring. She would text me at 9:47 at night about guest cards, then 5 minutes later send, "You were very quiet today." I stared at that message for a full minute. Then I typed, "Long day." She answered, "That's not why. I should have stopped there." Instead, I wrote, "Then why?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Because you were trying not to look at me." I put my phone face down on my bed, like that solved anything. It didn't. The next day, she acted normal in front of everyone. Almost too normal. She handed me revised gift tags, corrected a floral order, told a lighting vendor his amber wash made the room look cheap, and smiled at George when he stopped by for a 10-minute walkthrough. George asked me 2 questions about shuttle timing. I answered both cleanly. "Good," he said. "Keep close to this." I didn't look at Sabrina, but I felt her looking at me. The line moved slowly at first. That was the part I used to make myself feel less guilty. It wasn't one sudden leap. It was 100 small choices I could have stopped making. I stayed after vendors left. I answered late messages. I walked through empty villas with her while the property crew packed up outside. I let her stand too close. I let myself enjoy that she had asked for me. One evening, 2 weeks before the showcase, we were in the lakefront villa after a donor tasting setup. The catering manager had just left with his assistant, and the sun was low over the water. The villa was quiet except for the ice machine humming under the counter. There were 6 bottles on the dining table, all marked for the donor tasting. Sabrina picked one up and read the label. "This one is too good for people who pretend to taste notes of oak just because someone told them to." I closed the binder. "We probably shouldn't open it." She looked at me. "Probably." "Sabrina." She smiled at how I said her name, like I was already pleading and didn't know it. "Relax, Mason. It's 1 bottle." She opened it anyway. I stood there with the binder against my chest while she poured a little into 2 glasses. Not full, just enough to make it feel like we had crossed some small professional line before the bigger one showed up. She handed me a glass. "You're less nervous now." "No, I'm not. That's honest." She leaned against the edge of the table. "I like that. I didn't drink. I should head back. You always say that right before you stay." I looked at the door. It was closed. I remembered closing it when the caterer left because the air conditioning was running high. That tiny detail hit me hard. Closed door. Empty villa. George's wife standing 5 feet away with donor wine in her hand. "I don't think this is smart," I said. "No," she said. "It isn't." She set her glass down and stepped toward me. I could have moved. I want to say I didn't know what was happening, but I did. I knew before she reached me. I knew before her hand touched the front of my jacket. I knew before she looked at my mouth and then back at my eyes. "You're still thinking," she said. "I'm trying to. That must be exhausting." "Sabrina." She kissed me before I could finish. For 1 second, I froze. Not because I didn't want it, because wanting it was exactly the problem. Then I kissed her back. The binder slid out of my hand and hit the floor with a flat slap that sounded too loud in the empty villa. Sabrina laughed softly against my mouth, like even that amused her, like I was still the nervous assistant dropping things while she decided how far the night would go. I knew she was married. I knew who her husband was. I knew my badge, my paycheck, my future, every small thing I was trying to build. All of it sat under George Jansen's name. And I stayed. Afterward, I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel, the windows down even though the air was warm. My phone buzzed before I reached the interstate. "You forgot your pen." I looked at the message at a red light until somebody behind me tapped their horn. I told myself it had happened once. One bad choice. One moment that got away from me. Then, at midnight, I answered. "Keep it." She wrote back almost right away. "Come get it tomorrow." That was when I stopped pretending it was a mistake. It wasn't. It was an affair. And the worst part was, some part of me felt like I had finally been chosen. After that night, I got better at my job in a way that made me feel worse. That was the part nobody would have guessed from the outside. They saw me showing up early, answering faster, catching details other people missed, and they thought I had finally found my rhythm. Maybe I had. But the truth was, I knew everything, because Sabrina kept me close to everything. I knew which donor wanted a quiet cabin away from the dock. I knew which foundation board member hated lilies. I knew the catering staff had mislabeled 2 tasting menus before Amy saw them. I knew the AV team was short 1 uplight for the east wall, and I fixed it before George walked through. People started saying my name differently. Not like, "Mason, go grab that." More like, "Mason probably has it." That sounds small until you've spent months being the guy people only noticed when something was missing. George noticed too. One morning, during a showcase prep meeting, I was standing along the wall with my laptop open, only there to take notes. George was at the head of the table, calm as always, while senior staff went back and forth about donor arrival timing. "The lodge entrance will bottleneck after 6, I said before I could stop myself. Everyone looked at me. My face got hot. "Sorry." George didn't blink. "Why?" I swallowed. "Because half the preview tours end at 5:40, but the shuttle drop is scheduled for 5:50. People coming back from the villas will hit the welcome group right at the front doors. If we hold the second shuttle 10 minutes and route returning guests through the terrace path, it clears." The room went quiet. George looked at Amy. "Would that work?" She checked her notes. "Yes. Actually, that's better." George turned back to me. "Sharp." One word. That was all it took. I walked out of that meeting feeling taller, like my cheap shoes made a different sound on the floor. Senior managers who used to talk around me started asking what I thought. I got copied on threads I never would have seen before. I got pulled into calls instead of reading summaries afterward. And every time that happened, Sabrina would send something like, "Look at you climbing." I should have hated how she said it. I didn't. The affair settled into a pattern fast. Too fast. That was how I knew we were both more practiced at lying than I wanted to admit. She would ask me to check a model villa after a furniture delivery. She would have me meet her at the hotel downtown because she wanted to review donor gift placement in a suite. She would call from the back of one of George's cars and tell me to bring a portfolio to the private entrance, even though half the time the portfolio barely mattered. There was always a reason. There was always a door that closed. And every time, I told myself this one was the last reckless one. Then she would look at me like I was the only person in the room, and I would forget the speech I had prepared on the drive over. Talia knew. I'm sure she knew from the beginning, but by then, she didn't even pretend not to. One afternoon at the lake property, I stepped out of a villa after Sabrina, holding a box of revised table cards. Talia was sitting on the porch rail with sunglasses on, drinking iced tea through a straw. "Well," she said, looking at my shirt collar, "operations must be very demanding." Sabrina laughed and took the box from me. "Leave him alone. I'm trying to help him." Talia looked right at me. This ends badly for the employee. It always does. Write in the comments. Should Mason have listened to Talia's warning right there? Or was he already too deep because Sabrina made him feel important for the first time? My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Sabrina rolled her eyes. "You make everything sound tragic." "No," Talia said. "I make things sound obvious." I waited for Sabrina to deny it, to say we were just working, to protect the story in front of someone else. She didn't. She just walked inside and called over her shoulder, "Mason, bring the sample book." So I did. That was the problem with me then. I heard the warning. I understood it. I still followed her inside. The signs started piling up after that. A driver named Dale saw me leaving the private hotel level at 7 in the morning with my hair still damp from the shower in the staff gym downstairs. He didn't say anything, but his eyes moved from me to the elevator behind me, then back to my face. A housekeeper at the lake property found Sabrina's bracelet in a chair cushion in Villa 4. Sabrina laughed it off and said she had been there reviewing fabrics. I was standing 10 feet away when she said it. The housekeeper looked at me for half a second too long. Then there was the schedule slip. George came into the staging room while I was checking donor bags. "Where's Sabrina?" he asked Amy. Before Amy answered, I said, "She's with the florist at the West Lawn." The room stopped. George turned toward me. "I was asking Amy." I felt my throat tighten. "Right. Sorry. I just saw the calendar." There was no calendar open in front of me. George's eyes dropped to my empty hands, then lifted back to my face. "Good to know," he said. "Nothing else." That was worse than yelling. After that, I started noticing him noticing. He would walk into a room and glance at where I was standing in relation to Sabrina. He would ask a question he probably knew the answer to, just to see who answered first. He would pause when staff went quiet too quickly. He wasn't stupid. He had just been busy. There's a difference. The closest call happened at the Jansen house. I had no business being there after 6. Sabrina said she needed help sorting foundation signage in George's private study before the courier arrived. That was the reason. There was always a reason. The house sat behind a gate in Belle Meade. White brick, black shutters, clean lawn, quiet driveway. The kind of place where even the air felt managed. A housekeeper let me in and told me Mrs. Jansen was upstairs. I carried the portfolio like a shield. Sabrina met me near the guest room hallway, barefoot, holding 2 printed proofs. "You look scared," she said. "I am scared. That's probably why I like you. We shouldn't do this here." She stepped closer and straightened my collar. "Then we'll be quick with the signage." I almost laughed because it was such a bad lie, and because I still wanted to believe it. 20 minutes later, we were in the upstairs guest room with a portfolio open on a chair and half the signage spread across the bed like evidence. Sabrina was sitting near the window, smiling at me like the house, the staff, her husband, my job, all of it was just background noise. Then we heard the front door. Not a door. The door. Her smile vanished. A man's voice downstairs. George's. My whole body went cold. Sabrina stood so fast, one of the proofs slid to the floor. He wasn't supposed to be back. That sentence hit harder than the sound of his voice, because it meant she had checked. She opened the guest room door and listened. I could hear him talking to someone downstairs, low and calm. "Side stairs," she whispered. "Now." I grabbed the portfolio and shoved papers inside crookedly. My hands didn't work right. Sabrina picked up one sheet I had missed and pushed it against my chest. "Breathe," she said. I wanted to ask if she was serious. Instead, I followed her through the hall, down a narrow back staircase, and into a mudroom that smelled like lemon cleaner and rain jackets. A housekeeper looked up from folding towels. Sabrina didn't even slow down. "Mason's taking donor signage to the courier," she said smoothly. The housekeeper nodded, but her eyes moved over my face, my crooked collar, the portfolio clutched too tight in my hand. I stepped out through the side entrance and into the driveway, just as George's voice carried from inside. "Mason still here?" I froze. Sabrina answered from somewhere behind me, bright and easy. "Just leaving. I had him bring the signage proofs." There was a pause. Then George said, "Of course." I walked to my car without turning around. By the time I got in, my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the key into the ignition on the first try. My phone buzzed before I reached the gate. That was close. I stared at it, waiting for the fear to turn into common sense. Then another message came through. You handled it well. And there it was again. The praise. The little hook under my ribs. I drove away, knowing the pattern was turning against me. The staff knew pieces. Talia knew more. George was starting to look directly at the spaces where the lies didn't fit. I knew I should stop. I knew it as clearly as I knew the road back to my apartment. But the next morning, George asked me to sit in on a donor call, and Sabrina smiled at me across the conference room like we still had a secret no one could touch. So I stayed. Not because I didn't see the fall coming, because I had started thinking maybe I could outrun it. The foundation showcase weekend worked. That was the strange, ugly part. From the outside, it looked like everything we had built was holding together. The donor boards were straight. The lighting hit the lake-facing windows just right. The gift bags were lined up by last name, not company name, which Sabrina had insisted on because she said people liked feeling personally remembered. The shuttle flow stayed clean. No one waited too long. No one important complained. George looked pleased, not excited. George didn't do excited. But he stood near the terrace during the final evening reception with one hand in his pocket, watching donors move through the property, and I saw that quiet look on his face. The look of a man seeing money turn into more money. At one point, he came over while I was checking the brunch packet count. Mason, I looked up fast. Yes, sir. Good work this weekend. For a second, I forgot everything else. The lies, Sabrina, the side doors, Talia's warning, the housekeeper's stare, the driver in the hotel garage. All of it went quiet because George Jansen had looked at me in front of two senior managers and said I had done good work. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. He nodded once. Don't disappear after launch. We'll need people who know the property. We'll need people. I held on to that sentence like it was a key. Across the room, Sabrina was talking to a couple from Birmingham near the wine station. She wore a white dress and gold earrings, and she looked completely alive under the warm lights. She glanced over at me while George was still close enough to hear me breathe. Just one glance. But it said, see? Like this was ours. Like I was rising because I deserved it. Not because I was standing inside a trap that had been polished until it looked like an opportunity. The next morning was the final donor brunch. Everything was bright and clean and too cheerful for how little sleep I had gotten. Guests sat under white umbrellas near the lawn. Servers moved between tables with coffee and silver trays. George gave a short speech about community, stewardship, and thoughtful development. All the words people used when they were selling expensive places without saying they were selling expensive places. Sabrina sat near the front, smiling up at him like the perfect wife. I stood near the service entry with a radio clipped to my belt and watched both of them. I remember thinking I should step back after that. The weekend was done. The showcase had worked. George had noticed me. Maybe I could let Sabrina become a bad chapter I survived before it ruined me completely. That thought lasted maybe 20 minutes. Then, Sabrina walked past me after brunch and said without looking over, "Guest wing, 5 minutes." I should have stayed where I was. Instead, 5 minutes later, I was in the guest wing hallway pretending to check room turnover notes, while she came out of one of the rooms, smoothing her hair with one hand and holding her shoes in the other. She smiled like we were still untouchable. "Relax," she said. "Everyone's outside." That was the last time she said something like that, and I believed her. Monday morning, I was back in the Nashville office, sorting follow-up packets at the long work table outside the operations bullpen. Thank you cards, foundation brochures, donor interest forms, updated property sheets. My head hurt from lack of sleep, but I kept moving because people were watching me differently now. Amy asked me to review the final transportation invoice. A senior manager told me George might want me in the post-launch meeting. Somebody from development asked if I had a minute, like my minutes had value now. I was tired, but I felt it again. That stupid lift in my chest. That belief that I had made it past the worst part and still somehow come out ahead. George was in the glass conference room nearby with the door open, talking quietly with his assistant. I noticed him, but I didn't worry. That was how careless I had gotten. He had become part of the background again. Then my phone buzzed on the table. I looked down automatically. Sabrina. I left my bracelet under the guest room chair. Get it before staff finds it. The message lit up the screen long enough for me to read it, and long enough for George to see me freeze. I felt him before I looked up. The conversation in the glass room had stopped. George stood in the doorway, eyes on my phone. "What did Sabrina leave?" he asked. My hand moved too fast. I turned the phone over. That made it worse. "Nothing," I said. "Just event stuff." George walked toward me slowly. Not angry. Not loud. That was almost worse. The office seemed to quiet around him without anyone being told. What event stuff? I picked up a packet, then set it down because my hand wasn't steady. A bracelet. For the display, maybe. I'm not sure. A bracelet for the display. I nodded once, already hating myself. George held out his hand. No speech. No threat. Just his hand. I looked at it, then at him. If I refused, that answered the question. If I handed it over, that answered it too. There was no clean hallway left to slip through. I gave him the phone. He turned it over, read the message, and his face changed by almost nothing. That was George. Even then. Even when his wife's message was sitting in his hand. Even when my whole career was cracking open in front of the office. He didn't give people the satisfaction of seeing the hit. He looked at me. "When were you in my guest room?" My mouth opened. Nothing came out. He waited. I could hear someone's keyboard stop behind me. I could hear the copy machine warming up near my desk. Normal office sounds, suddenly cruel, because they meant everyone else still had a normal office to belong to. "It wasn't," I started. George cut me off. "Don't lie." 2 words. Flat and final. I looked down at the packet table. My name badge hung crooked from my belt loop. I noticed that stupid detail and almost laughed because some part of me still wanted to fix how I looked. George set my phone on the table. "Get your things. Mr. Jansen. Now." That was it. No meeting. No human resources conversation. No chance to explain, as if there was an explanation that didn't make me smaller. I walked to my desk while the office pretended not to watch. That was the worst part. Nobody stared directly. They looked at screens, papers, coffee cups, anything but me. Amy's face had gone pale. She didn't say anything. My login stopped working before I finished putting my notebook in my bag. By the time I reached the elevator, my badge wouldn't open the floor access panel. George's assistant had to press the button for me. She didn't meet my eyes. In the parking garage, the air felt damp and heavy. I got into my car but didn't start it. I just sat there with my bag on the passenger seat and my phone in my hand, watching the screen like I still had somewhere to be. Sabrina called 6 minutes later. For one stupid second, I thought she might say she was sorry. I answered. "How much does he know?" she asked. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened?" Not even my name. Just damage control. I stared through the windshield at the concrete wall in front of me. "Mason," she said, sharper now. "What did he see?" I laughed once, but there was nothing funny in it. "Your message." She went quiet. Then she said, "Okay, don't say anything else to anyone. I need to know exactly what you told him." That did it. Whatever fantasy I still had left, whatever little piece of me believed we had been in something together, cracked right there in that parking garage. "You need to deal with your husband," I said. "Mason," I hung up. My hands were steady then. That surprised me. I started the car and drove out of the garage without knowing where I was going. No clean exit, no graceful package, no mentor calling later to say I had talent. And this was unfortunate. My access was gone. My email was gone. The people who had started saying my name differently would stop saying it at all. And Sabrina would survive it. George would survive it. Their house would stay behind the gate. The lake property would open. Donors would still praise the view. Staff would still move quietly through rooms that cost more than their lives could comfortably hold. I had thought doors were opening. They weren't. I had just been allowed inside long enough to be useful. George used me when I solved problems. Sabrina used me when I made her feel restless and wanted and young in a way her own life didn't. And once I became inconvenient, I was the easiest thing to remove. That was the truth I drove away with. I was never entering their world. I was only passing through it with a badge that could be shut off.